The ancient stones of the temple had been whispering the same words for 1,000 years. Carved in the language of the old gods, the prophecy was simple and absolute. When the stars aligned in the pattern of the broken crown, the demon lord and the holy knight would meet in battle, and their clash would unmake the world or remake it. One would destroy the other, and in that destruction, the fate of every living soul would be decided. Azrael had lived with these words hanging over him since the day he'd claimed his throne in the Obsidian Palace. Being a demon lord wasn't something he'd asked for, but destiny rarely consulted anyone's preferences. He'd inherited the title from his predecessor, along with all the responsibilities, expectations, and apparently prophecies that came with it. For 200 years, he'd ruled the demon realm with what he considered reasonable fairness, avoiding the theatrical villainy that so many of his kind seemed to enjoy. He found the whole cackling and scheming routine exhausting. The prophecy, though, that was unavoidable. Every oracle, every seer, every half-talented fortune teller from both the mortal and demon realms had seen the same vision. A warrior bathed in holy light, wielding a sword that burned with divine fire, standing across a battlefield from him. The images were always the same. The outcome was always unclear. Destruction was always guaranteed. Azrael had tried ignoring it, he'd tried preparing for it, he'd even tried in a moment of what his advisors called unfortunate weakness to prevent it by simply never leaving his realm. For 50 years he'd stayed within the demon territories, thinking perhaps he could avoid whoever this holy knight was supposed to be. The prophecy had other plans. The threads of fate he'd learned were less like gentle guidelines and more like iron chains. The summons came on a Tuesday, which Azrael found oddly mundane for a world-changing event. A tear in the fabric between realms, a pull he couldn't resist, and suddenly he was standing in the mortal world for the first time in half a century. The location was dramatic enough to satisfy any prophecy, ancient ruins beneath a sky where the stars had indeed aligned in the pattern of the broken crown. He could feel the weight of destiny settling around his shoulders like a lead cloak. She was already there, waiting, the holy night. Azrael had expected someone imposing, perhaps battle-scarred and grim. Instead, he found himself looking at a woman in silver armor that caught the starlight, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and an expression on her face that could only be described as deeply annoyed. "So you're the demon lord," she said, not even reaching for her sword. "I imagined someone taller." Azrael blinked. In 200 years of existence, through countless battles and negotiations and dramatic confrontations, no one had ever opened with a comment about his height. "I'm 6'3", he replied, somewhat defensively. "Like I said, taller." She shifted her weight, and he noticed she looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but tired in the way of someone who'd carried a heavy burden for far too long. "I'm Celeste. I assume you know why we're here." The prophecy, Azrael looked around at the ruins, at the aligned stars, at the very obvious stage that fate had set for them. "We're meant to destroy each other." Apparently, Celeste finally looked at him properly, her green eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him oddly self-conscious. "You don't look particularly destroyed yet." "Neither do you." He wasn't sure what he'd expected from this moment. Immediate violence, perhaps divine proclamations. Instead, they were standing in ancient ruins making awkward small talk while the universe waited for them to fulfill their destined roles. "Should we? Do you want to get started? With the battle, I mean." Celeste sighed, a long, exhausted sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. "Do you want to fight?" The question caught Azrael off guard. He'd spent decades preparing for this confrontation, learning every combat technique, mastering every dark art that might give him an edge. But not particularly, he admitted. "No offense." "None taken." She sat down on a fallen pillar, the gesture so casual and unexpected that Azrael just stared. "I've been training for this since I was 6 years old. The chosen holy knight destined to face the demon lord. They built my entire life around this moment. Every sword lesson, every prayer, every meditation, all leading here." Azrael found himself sitting as well on another section of the ruined wall. This was possibly the strangest confrontation he'd ever experienced. 200 years, he offered. "That's how long I've known this was coming." "That's worse." Celeste pulled off her gauntlets, flexing her fingers. At least my existence has been shorter, though they were very thorough about making sure I never had time for anything else. Can't risk the holy night being distracted by frivolous things like friends or hobbies or any kind of normal life. There was a bitterness in her voice that Azrael recognized. He'd heard it in his own when he spoke about the weight of his crown. They wouldn't let me abdicate, he said. I tried about 80 years ago, thought perhaps if I wasn't the demon lord anymore, the prophecy would find someone else to torment. Turns out the title is magically binding. I'm stuck with it until death. And I'm bound by divine mandate. The power chose me before I was born. Celeste looked up at the stars, at the pattern that had pulled them both to this place. Do you ever wonder if fate actually knows what it's doing? Because from where I'm sitting, this all seems unnecessarily complicated. Azrael laughed before he could stop himself. It startled them both. I've been saying that for decades. Why does the prophecy need to be so dramatic? Why the specific star alignment? Why ancient ruins? If the universe wants us to fight, we could have done it anywhere. Right, I have a perfectly good training ground back at the cathedral, much better lighting. Celeste smiled slightly, and Azrael noticed it changed her entire face, softening the hard edges that duty had carved there. Though I suppose they met in the temple gym and had their prophesied battle under fluorescent lights doesn't have quite the same ring to it. They sat in silence for a moment, the absurdity of the situation settling over them both. Here they were, brought together by ancient prophecy to destroy each other, and instead they were critiquing the dramatic choices of fate itself. Azrael should have felt worried about this development. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember: relief. Can I ask you something? Celeste's voice was quieter now, more serious. The prophecy says we're meant to destroy each other, but it doesn't actually say we have to do it right now, does it? Azrael thought about the words carved in the temple stone, the visions the oracles had shared, all the prophecies he'd studied over the centuries. No, he said slowly, it says we'll meet when the stars align, that our confrontation will determine the fate of the realms, but it doesn't give a timeline for the actual destruction part. So we've met, that's done, Celeste gestured around them. The stars aligned, we're here, we're confronting. Technically, we're fulfilling the letter of the prophecy. Are you suggesting we postpone our destined battle to unmake or remake the world? Despite himself, Azrael felt a smile tugging at his lips. I'm suggesting that I've spent my entire life being told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and for once, just this once, I'd like to make my own choice. Celeste stood up, and now she did draw her sword, but she planted it point down in the ground between them. I choose not to fight someone I just met just because some ancient prophecy says I should. Azrael rose as well, considering her words. It was rebellion against fate itself, the kind of thing that could have serious consequences. It was also the most appealing suggestion anyone had made to him in 2 centuries. The prophecy will still be there, he pointed out. This moment, this alignment, it's supposed to be important. Then let it be important in a different way. Celeste met his eyes, and he saw in them the same desperate hope he felt, the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could be more than what destiny had written for them. Let it be the moment we chose something different. The weight of destiny pressed down on them both. Azrael could feel it, the expectation of the universe itself that this moment would end in fire and blood and world-changing destruction. Every force that had aligned to bring them here was waiting for them to play their parts. He thought about his throne, his duties, the endless weight of being what everyone expected him to be. Then he thought about sitting on these ruins, talking to someone who understood that weight because she carried it too. I'm Azrael, he said, offering his hand in the human custom. Demon Lord, apparently destined to be your destroyer, pleased to meet you. Celeste looked at his hand for a long moment, then she smiled, really smiled this time, and took it. Her grip was strong, calloused from years of sword work, and warm despite the cold starlight. Celeste, holy night, your supposed destruction, the pleasure is mine. They shook hands in the ruins while the prophecy waited and the stars watched, and nothing exploded. The world didn't end. The realms didn't remake themselves. There was just a demon lord and a holy knight choosing for the first time in their long, duty-bound lives to do something that was theirs alone. The problem with defying a major prophecy, Azrael discovered, was that the universe tended to notice. In the 3 weeks following their first meeting, he'd experienced no fewer than 7 coincidental situations designed to force another confrontation, a magical bridge between realms that appeared directly between his palace and Celeste's cathedral, a sudden plague of visions among both demon and human seers showing the two of them in battle. A mysterious compulsion that kept pulling him toward the mortal realms. Fate, it seemed, was getting impatient. Azrael was in his study reviewing reports from his border guards when the now familiar pull started again. It felt like a hook behind his sternum, gently but insistently tugging him toward a specific point in the mortal world. He'd learned to recognize the sensation. He'd also learned that ignoring it only made it worse. The last time he'd tried to resist, he'd ended up accidentally teleporting during a council meeting, which had been embarrassing for everyone involved. Not again, he muttered, but he was already standing, already reaching for his coat. His advisor, an ancient demon named Mordeth who'd served 3 demon lords before him, looked up from his own paperwork. The prophecy, Mordeth asked with the long-suffering tone of someone who'd had this conversation too many times recently. Apparently it's Tuesday, so yes. Azrael straightened his collar, checking his reflection in the dark mirror that hung on his wall. He told himself he wasn't fussing with his appearance, he was just maintaining appropriate dignity for a demon lord. Mordeth's knowing look suggested he wasn't fooled. You know, my lord, when I was young, demon lords who tried to avoid their destiny usually ended up causing the very catastrophe they were trying to prevent. It's traditional. When you were young, demon lords were still doing the whole human sacrifice thing. I think we can agree that tradition isn't always right. Azrael gave up on his hair, which had never cooperated anyway. Besides, I'm not avoiding destiny, I'm just taking it slowly. Is that what we are calling it? I'm calling it maintaining diplomatic relations between our realms. We haven't had open war with the mortal world in 3 centuries. Meeting with their holy knight is strategic. Even to his own ears, it sounded like a weak excuse. Of course, my lord, Mordeth's expression was perfectly neutral in the way that suggested intense internal amusement. I'm sure the fact that you've spent the last 3 weeks smiling at random moments has nothing to do with these diplomatic relations. Azrael decided dignity was overrated and simply vanished, letting the pull of fate whisk him away before Mordeth could make any more observations. The transition between realms felt like stepping through a waterfall, a moment of disorientation and pressure, and then he was standing in the mortal world. Not in ancient ruins this time, fate had apparently decided to be slightly less dramatic. Instead, Azrael found himself in a garden moonlit and fragrant with night-blooming flowers. It was beautiful in a way that Demon Realm gardens never quite managed. Life grew differently here, softer and more delicate. You felt it too, then? He turned to find Celeste stepping out from behind a rose trellis. She wasn't wearing her armor tonight, just simple clothes that made her look younger, less like the legendary Holy Knight and more like an ordinary woman. Azrael felt something in his chest tighten at the sight. The universe is getting less subtle about its hints, he said. Last week it tried to manifest a battlefield in my throne room. I got a vision during morning prayers, very distracting. Celeste walked closer, and he caught the scent of herbs and sword oil, a combination that was becoming pleasantly familiar. The other knights are starting to ask questions about why I keep disappearing. They'd been meeting like this, pulled together by fate's insistent tugging, for 3 weeks now, sometimes in ruins, sometimes in forests, once memorably in an abandoned tower where they'd spent 4 hours talking while rain poured outside. Every meeting was supposed to be their prophesied battle. Every meeting ended with them simply talking instead. What do you tell them? Azrael asked. That I'm meditating on the prophecy, preparing spiritually for the confrontation. She smiled wryly. Not technically a lie, I am thinking about the prophecy, just not in the way they imagine. My council thinks I'm scouting the mortal realm for weaknesses. Azrael gestured to a stone bench beneath an apple tree, and they sat together in a way that was becoming routine, also not technically a lie. Have you found any weaknesses? There was a teasing note in her voice. Your realm's border defenses are actually quite poor in the northeastern quarter, and whoever designed your capital city's layout clearly never considered the possibility of an aerial assault. He paused, then added more softly, and apparently I'm weak to gardens at midnight. Celeste laughed, the sound like bells in the quiet night. That's my fault. I asked for somewhere peaceful this time. I thought maybe if I concentrated on a specific place when I felt the pull, it might influence where we ended up. You can do that. Azrael had been passively accepting wherever fate flung him, never considering he might have a choice in the matter. Apparently, this is the cathedral garden where I used to hide when I was supposed to be at weapon training. She touched one of the roses gently. No one thinks to look for the holy knight among the flowers. They expect me on the training grounds, being appropriately warrior-like. There was something wistful in her expression, a glimpse of the child she'd been before duty had consumed her life. Azrael found himself asking, what would you have chosen if you hadn't been selected as the holy knight? Celeste was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. I used to think about being a healer, someone who helped people without all the violence and prophecy, maybe running a small clinic somewhere quiet, growing herbs, learning medicine. She smiled sadly. Silly, isn't it, the chosen warrior of the divine wanting to tend gardens? No sillier than a demon lord who wanted to be a scholar, Azrael admitted. It was something he'd never told anyone, not in 200 years of rule. Before I inherited the title, I spent most of my time in libraries. I was researching the nature of magic, how it flows between realms. I had theories about the fundamental connections between all living things. Celeste turned to look at him fully, her green eyes curious in the moonlight. Demon lords don't have time for theoretical research. There's a realm to run, a role to play, and everyone expects certain things: power, darkness, dramatic proclamations. He found himself smiling despite the old disappointment. No one wants a demon lord who's more interested in books than battle. I would, Celeste said quietly. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, she quickly added, I mean, it would be nice if we could all just be who we want to be instead of what we're supposed to be. But Azrael had heard what she said first, and the words settled warm in his chest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the garden. It was peaceful in a way that Azrael's life rarely was. The demon realm was beautiful but harsh, all volcanic glass and dark fire. This softer beauty was something he'd almost forgotten existed. Can I show you something? Celeste asked suddenly. It's not far. They walked through the garden together, and Azrael marveled at how easy it was just walking beside her. No guards, no formality, no weight of their respective titles, just two people in a garden at night. She led him to a small greenhouse tucked against the cathedral wall, nearly hidden by climbing vines. Inside, the air was warm and humid, rich with the smell of growing things. Shelves lined the walls, covered with pots and planters in various stages of growth. Herbs, flowers, even small vegetables, all carefully tended. This is mine, Celeste said, and there was pride in her voice. My secret rebellion. Everyone thinks I'm dedicated every moment to training and prayer, and I am mostly, but I keep this place too, a reminder that I'm more than just a weapon. Azrael moved through the small space, recognizing some plants, curious about others. He paused at a shelf of carefully labeled herbs. You did want to be a healer. I am a healer, just not officially. She touched a pot of lavender gently. Some of the younger knights come to me when they're injured. I help them when I can. The formal healers ask too many questions, file too many reports. Sometimes people just need help without the bureaucracy. That's kind. Azrael examined a plant he didn't recognize, small purple flowers on delicate stems. In the demon realm, we have healers, but it's considered a weakness to need them. Most demons would rather suffer than admit injury. That sounds lonely. It was. Azrael had never quite put it into words before, but yes, his realm was lonely, power and pride, but very little actual connection. May I? He gestured to the plant. At Celeste's nod, he gently touched the leaves, then carefully he let a small thread of his magic flow into it. Demon magic, dark and usually destructive, but magic he'd learned long ago in his scholar days was about intention as much as inherent nature. The plant shivered under his touch and then suddenly bloomed, twice as many flowers opening in the space of a heartbeat. Celeste gasped, "How did you? That's not possible. Dark magic doesn't create, it destroys." Common misconception. Azrael felt absurdly pleased at her amazed expression. Magic is just energy, it's the wielder's intention that determines the effect. Demon magic has a destructive nature, yes, but that just means it's breaking down barriers. In this case, the barriers preventing the plant from reaching its full potential. He gestured to the now flourishing purple flowers. It'll fade back to normal in a few hours. I'm not powerful enough to make permanent changes to living things. But for a while, it can be more than it was. That's beautiful, Celeste breathed. She looked at him with something like wonder. No one ever talks about demon magic like that, like it could be anything but evil. It's not evil, it's just different. Azrael moved to another plant, a struggling herb that looked half dead. May I try to help this one? They spent the next hour in the greenhouse, Azrael carefully using his magic to encourage growth while Celeste shared what she knew about each plant. She told him about their uses, their growing needs, the patients she'd helped with various tinctures and salves. He explained the theory of magical energy flow, how intention shaped power, the research he'd abandoned when he became Demon Lord. It was easy, Azrael realized, easier than anything had been in longer than he could remember, talking to her, sharing this quiet space, using his power for something gentle instead of destructive. For a few hours, he wasn't the Demon Lord and she wasn't the Holy Knight. They were just two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. I have a library, he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could think better of them. In my palace, the largest collection of magical texts in any realm, most of it's demon magic, but there are sections on healing arts, herb lore, magical theory. He hesitated, then added, "You could visit, if you wanted, I could show you." Celeste looked up at him, and in her expression he saw the same longing he felt, the desire for more of these moments, this unexpected connection, but he also saw the worry. The Demon Lord's palace, I'm not sure that's safe. It would be, you'd be my guest, no one would dare harm you, he smiled wryly. They're all terrified of me despite my best efforts to be a reasonable ruler. It's not my safety I'm worried about, Celeste gestured between them. This is already dangerous, we're supposed to be enemies, the prophecy. The prophecy said we'd destroy each other, it didn't specify how or when. Azrael took a careful breath. What if we're destroying who we were supposed to be, the lonely demon lord, the isolated holy knight? What if that's the destruction that was prophesied? It was a thin rationalization and they both knew it, but Celeste smiled, small and hopeful. Philosophical destruction, I like it. So you'll visit? She bit her lip, clearly torn between duty and desire. Then, in a choice that Azrael suspected was as significant for her as it was for him, she nodded. Yes, I'd like to see your library. The garden around them seemed to glow a little brighter, or maybe that was just Azrael's imagination. They made plans carefully for a meeting in 3 days. Neutral ground first, then if all went well, the library. It felt clandestine and slightly ridiculous, two of the most powerful beings in their respective realms sneaking around like teenagers with a forbidden friendship. But as Azrael returned to the demon realm that night, he found he didn't care about the absurdity. For the first time in 200 years, he had something to look forward to that wasn't a duty or an obligation. He had someone who saw him as more than his title, who understood the weight of destiny because she carried it too. The prophecy might still be waiting, fate might still have plans for them both, but in the meantime they were making their own choices, writing their own story in the margins of destiny's grand design, and if that was its own kind of destruction, well, Azrael found he was willing to be destroyed. The library in Azrael's palace was a monument to obsession, 5 floors of books, scrolls, and magical texts, spiraling up through a tower that had been built for no other purpose than to house knowledge. Azrael had been collecting for 2 centuries, ever since he'd taken the throne, and realized that being Demon Lord came with substantial resources he could dedicate to his abandoned scholarly pursuits. If he couldn't spend his days researching, at least he could ensure the resources existed for those who came after him. He'd been pacing in front of the tower entrance for the past 20 minutes, which Mordeth had informed him was deeply undignified for a Demon Lord. Azrael had responded by pacing faster. Celeste was coming, here, to his realm. It felt momentous in a way that went beyond prophecy. When she appeared, stepping through the portal he'd created, Azrael felt his breath catch. She was in her armor, probably necessary for leaving the cathedral without suspicion, but she'd removed her helmet and her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked around the demon realm with wide eyes, taking in the landscape of volcanic glass and dark fire that was so different from her world. "It's beautiful," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "I expected it to be frightening." Most humans find it unsettling. Azrael gestured to the palace, which rose from the dark stone like a crown of obsidian and silver. The color palette is admittedly limited, lots of black and red and the occasional ominous purple. Celeste laughed, very on brand for a demon lord. "I've tried suggesting maybe some nice blues or greens, but apparently that would undermine the aesthetic of dread." He offered his arm, a formal gesture that felt oddly right. "Shall I show you the library?" The tower was Azrael's pride and joy, and watching Celeste's reaction as they entered made him absurdly happy. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the shelves that spiraled up and up, the magical lights that floated throughout providing perfect reading illumination, the comfortable chairs scattered throughout, the tables covered with ongoing research projects. "This is incredible," she breathed. "You could spend lifetimes here and not read everything." "I'm working on it, I have time." Azrael led her to the section he'd prepared, the texts on healing magic and herb lore he'd gathered from various realms. "I thought you might be interested in these, some of them are quite rare." They settled into the research with an ease that surprised them both. Celeste would find something interesting and share it, Azrael would explain the magical theory behind it, and they'd fall into discussions that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Hours passed without notice, marked only by the occasional servant who brought food and drink and then wisely retreated. "Listen to this," Celeste said, reading from an ancient text. "It says that healing magic and destructive magic are the same force, just applied differently. The power to unmake can also remake." She looked up at Azrael with excitement. "That's what you were saying about your magic in the greenhouse." "It's an old theory, most demon scholars dismissed it." Azrael moved to look over her shoulder at the text. "They preferred to think of our magic as inherently superior, not just different, but I always thought there was truth to it." They were sitting close together now, both leaning over the same book, and Azrael was acutely aware of her warmth beside him. She smelled like the herbs from her greenhouse and something else, something that was just her. When had he started noticing things like that? "What if we tested it?" Celeste suggested. "My magic is supposed to be holy, creative, healing. Yours is supposed to be dark and destructive, but what if we combined them?" It was a dangerous idea. Magics from different sources didn't always interact well, but Azrael found himself intrigued despite the risk. "What did you have in mind?" Celeste held out her hand, palm up, and called forth her power. Light gathered there, warm and golden, the pure holy magic of the divine warriors. It was beautiful, and Azrael noted with interest didn't hurt him at all. Common wisdom said that holy magic was painful to demons, but he felt nothing but a pleasant warmth. "Your turn," Celeste said softly. Azrael held his hand above hers, not quite touching, and called his own power. Dark magic, purple-black and crackling with energy, pooled in his palm. For a moment the two magics existed in proximity, light and dark, holy and demonic. They should have repelled each other, maybe even exploded. Instead, slowly, carefully, they began to swirl together. The result was something neither of them had seen before. Where the magics mixed, they created something new, a silvery violet energy that pulsed with potential. It wasn't light or dark, holy or demonic. It was both and neither, something entirely unique. "Incredible," Azrael whispered. He looked at Celeste and found her watching him instead of the magic, her green eyes reflecting the silver-violet light. "We're not supposed to be able to do this," she said. "Everything I was taught said our powers would destroy each other." "Maybe they are destroying each other, destroying the separation, the either-or." Azrael let the magic dissipate slowly, watching it fade into sparkles of light and shadow, creating something new from the destruction. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they'd just done settling over them. It was more than just an interesting magical experiment. It was proof that what they were doing, this connection between them, was creating something that shouldn't exist according to every rule of their worlds. Azrael, Celeste said, and the use of his name instead of his title sent warmth through his chest. What are we doing? It was the question they'd both been avoiding for weeks. The meetings could be explained away as reconnaissance, preparation for their prophesied battle, but this, spending hours in peaceful study combining their magics, the way his heart raced when she smiled, this was something else entirely. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want to stop. Celeste looked down at her hands where traces of their combined magic still sparkled. I'm supposed to destroy you. You're supposed to be my greatest enemy. Every vision, every prophecy, my entire life has been building toward our battle. I know. The fate of the realms depends on our confrontation. I know. And instead, I'm sitting in your library reading books about healing magic and thinking about how much I enjoy talking to you. She finally looked up at him, and there was fear in her eyes, but also something else, something that looked like hope. I've never had this before, someone who understands, who sees me as more than the Holy Knight. Azrael reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers laced through his naturally as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. I see you, Celeste, the healer who grows gardens in secret, the woman who's kind even when kindness isn't required, the person beneath the prophecy. And I see you, the scholar who became a demon lord, the ruler who tries to be gentle even when the world expects darkness. She squeezed his hand, but seeing each other doesn't change what we are, what we're meant to do. Doesn't it? Azrael stood, pulling her up with him, suddenly restless with the need to make her understand. Every prophecy says we'll destroy each other, but what if we're doing it now? What if every moment we spend together, every time we choose this over destiny, we're destroying the demon lord and the holy knight we're supposed to be? He led her to the window which looked out over the demon realm. In the distance he could see the border where his realm met the mortal world, a shimmer in the air where realities touched. I've been the demon lord for 200 years. I've been powerful and feared and utterly alone. And in 6 weeks of knowing you, I've felt more alive than in 2 centuries of ruling. Celeste stood beside him, her hand still in his, looking out at the strange landscape. They'll never accept this. Your people mine, we're supposed to be enemies. Since when have we done what we're supposed to do? Azrael turned to face her fully, his other hand coming up to gently touch her face. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. I'm tired of prophecies and expectations. I'm tired of being what everyone else needs me to be. What do you want to be? Her voice was barely a whisper. Happy, Azrael said simply. For the first time in my very long life, I just want to be happy, and somehow, impossibly, you make me happy. Celeste opened her eyes and there were tears there, but she was smiling. You make me happy too, you and your library and your theories about magic and the way you listen when I talk about my plants. She laughed, a slightly broken sound. I'm supposed to destroy you and instead I'm falling. She stopped, the words catching in her throat, but they both knew what she'd been about to say. The truth that had been building between them for weeks, the impossible thing that had somehow happened despite prophecy and duty and destiny. Azrael said it for both of them, I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, true and terrifying and wonderful. Celeste's breath hitched, and then she was closing the distance between them, her free hand coming up to grip his shoulder. This is impossible. Everything about us is impossible. Azrael rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. We are supposed to unmake the world. Maybe we can remake it instead. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people who should have been enemies, holding each other while the prophecy waited and their worlds turned, oblivious to this quiet revolution happening in a demon lord's library. Outside, the border between realms shimmered, and neither of them noticed the way it pulsed with silver-violet light, a new magic seeping into the foundations of reality. Celeste pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. If we do this, if we choose this, there will be consequences. Our people won't understand the prophecy. Let the prophecy wait. Azrael was surprised by the certainty in his own voice. I've spent 200 years doing what I was supposed to do. I think I've earned the right to make one choice that's mine. One choice that's ours, Celeste corrected, and she was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks. I'm choosing this too, choosing you, even though it's terrifying and probably disastrous and definitely not what anyone expects. Especially not the prophecy. Especially not the prophecy, she agreed, and then she was laughing and he was laughing, and it felt like breaking every rule of the universe just to find joy in each other. They talked through the night, making plans and acknowledging obstacles, being realistic about the challenges they'd face, but underneath it all was the simple, revolutionary truth: they were choosing each other. The demon lord and the holy knight, who were supposed to destroy each other, were instead destroying every expectation to build something new. When Celeste finally had to return to her realm, Azrael walked her to the portal. They stood at the border between worlds, reluctant to part. "I'll come back," Celeste promised. "As often as I can, we'll figure this out." "We will," Azrael kissed her forehead gently. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." She stepped through the portal and Azrael watched until she disappeared completely. Then he turned back to his palace, his library, his realm that suddenly felt less lonely. Mordeth was waiting, his ancient face carefully neutral. "I assume you had a productive evening of diplomatic relations, my lord." "Actually, yes," Azrael smiled, and he knew it was the smile of someone deeply, impossibly happy. "I think we're rewriting the prophecy. The prophecy that's been carved in stone for 1,000 years." "That's the one." Azrael headed toward his chambers, suddenly exhausted but content. "If anyone needs me, I'll be considering how to tell my council that I'm in love with my prophesied nemesis." "Of course, my lord," Mordeth said faintly. "I'll just be over here preparing for the end of the world, as one does." But Azrael was already gone, thinking not of endings but of beginnings, and of green eyes that saw him not as a demon lord but as simply himself. The prophecy could wait. For now he had something more important: hope. The war came 3 months after Azrael and Celeste stopped pretending they were preparing to fight each other and admitted they were simply in love. Not a war between them, but because of them. Both realms, discovering their respective champions had chosen each other over duty, had reacted with the predictable combination of outrage and panic. Azrael stood on the balcony of his palace watching an army gather at the border. Not his army, he'd refused to mobilize against the mortal realm. This was a coalition of demon nobles who decided that if their demon lord wouldn't fulfill the prophecy, they'd force the issue themselves. They'd handle the holy knight threat and deal with their disappointingly peaceful ruler afterward. "They're calling you a traitor," Mordeth said from behind him. The old demon sounded tired. "They say you've been enchanted, that the holy knight has corrupted you with her magic." "Have they considered that maybe I'm just happy?" Azrael didn't turn from the view. On the other side of the border he could see the mortal realm's army gathering as well. Celeste had sent word that her own order had essentially imprisoned her, declaring her unfit to serve as holy knight. They were preparing to invade the demon realm to rescue her and finish the prophecy with a new champion. Everyone, it seemed, was very invested in making sure the destined destruction happened on schedule. "Happiness isn't really part of the demon lord job description," Mordeth pointed out. "Then perhaps the job description needs updating." Azrael finally turned to face his advisor. "I won't fight her, Mordeth. I won't be what they want me to be anymore. Even if it means war, real war, not prophesied battle, but actual armies and actual death." Mordeth's ancient eyes were sad. "You've kept the peace for 2 centuries. This will undo all of it." Azrael knew he was right. He also knew he couldn't go back, couldn't unknow the way Celeste laughed at his terrible jokes, or the feeling of her hand in his, or the simple joy of being understood by another person. There has to be another way. "The prophecy. The prophecy said we'd destroy each other." Azrael's frustration finally broke through. "It said our confrontation would remake or unmake the world. Well, we confronted each other and we chose something different. Why isn't that enough?" Before Mordeth could answer, the air shimmered and Celeste appeared on the balcony in a flash of light and the lingering scent of metal. She was in her armor, her sword at her side, but there was blood on her shoulder and she was breathing hard. "Celeste," Azrael rushed to her, hands hovering over the injury. "What happened?" "I left." She was smiling despite the blood and exhaustion. "They tried to stop me. I had to fight my way through my own order. Can you believe that? People I've trained with for years, and they attacked me rather than let me come to you." Azrael was already channeling healing magic, the dark energy knitting her wound closed with surprising gentleness. Months of practice with her plants had made him better at this, more controlled. You shouldn't have risked it. Yes, I should have. We need to talk and we're running out of time. She caught his hands, stopping his fussing. Both our armies are preparing to march. They're going to force the confrontation we've been avoiding. I know, I won't fight you. And I won't fight you. Celeste looked at Mordeth, then back to Azrael. But I've been thinking about the prophecy, really thinking about it. What if everyone's been interpreting it wrong? Mordeth moved closer, interested despite himself. How so? The prophecy says we'll destroy each other and remake or unmake the world. Celeste's eyes were bright with the idea that had clearly been consuming her. Everyone assumed it meant we'd fight, one would die, and that death would trigger some kind of apocalyptic change. But what if the destruction is metaphorical? I suggested that, Azrael said, that we're destroying who we were supposed to be. Yes, but think bigger. Celeste gestured between them at the border at everything. We're not just destroying ourselves, we're destroying the entire structure that says demons and humans have to be enemies, that holy and dark magic can't coexist, that love and duty have to be opposed. Azrael felt something click in his mind, pieces falling into place. We're destroying the old world order. And maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Celeste's voice grew stronger, more certain. Look at what we've created together, magic that's both holy and demonic, a connection between realms that's built on understanding instead of fear. What if that's what the prophecy was actually about, not destroying each other but destroying the barriers between our worlds? Mordeth was staring at them both with an expression of dawning realization. The prophecy doesn't specify what kind of destruction. We all assumed violence because that's what we knew, but destruction of old systems, old hatreds, old divisions. Would certainly remake the world, Azrael finished. He grabbed Celeste's hands, energized by this new understanding. But how do we prove it? How do we show them that this is the fulfillment of the prophecy, not a betrayal of it? We give them exactly what they want, Celeste said. A confrontation between the demon lord and the holy knight, witnessed, public, undeniable. We just make sure it's our confrontation on our terms. The plan came together quickly after that, shaped by desperation and hope in equal measure. They would meet on the border with both armies watching. They would fulfill the letter of the prophecy while redefining its spirit. It was risky and possibly insane, but it was also the only chance they had to prove that their choice was not just valid but prophesied. The next day, Azrael stood on the demon side of the border while Celeste stood on the mortal side. Between them, the shimmer of reality meeting reality, the line that had divided their worlds for millennia. Behind him, demon nobles and soldiers watched with eager anticipation for the battle to come. Behind her, knights and holy warriors waited to see their champion fulfill her destiny. Neither army knew they were about to be profoundly disappointed. Demon Lord, Celeste called out, her voice carrying with magical amplification, I stand ready to fulfill the prophecy. Holy Knight, Azrael responded, matching her formal tone, as do I. They walked forward simultaneously, meeting exactly at the border. Up close, Azrael could see the fear hidden beneath Celeste's brave exterior. He gave her a small smile, meant only for her, and saw her relax slightly. Whatever happened next, they were facing it together. The prophecy says we will destroy each other, Celeste announced, loud enough for both armies to hear, and so we shall. She drew her sword, and Azrael heard the demons behind him cheer. The mortals were shouting encouragement to their champion. Everyone was so eager for the violence they'd been promised. Azrael drew his own weapon, a blade of dark crystal that hummed with power. They circled each other slowly, and to the watching armies it must have looked like the beginning of an epic battle. In reality, Azrael was desperately hoping they wouldn't have to actually hurt each other to sell this performance. Celeste struck first, a precise blow that Azrael blocked easily. Their weapons met with a flash of light and shadow, and where they connected, that silver-violet energy sparked into being. The same energy they'd created in the library, the proof that their powers could coexist. They fought, but it was nothing like the battle the prophecy had promised. It was a dance, a demonstration, each move calculated not to harm but to show. Every clash of their weapons created more of that impossible mixed magic. Every exchange proved that holy and demonic could not just coexist but could create something new together. "I destroy your loneliness," Celeste called out, her sword moving in a pattern they'd practiced. "I destroy your isolation," Azrael responded, matching her movements. The watching armies were confused now. This wasn't the violent confrontation they'd expected, but Azrael and Celeste didn't stop. They continued their dance, calling out with each exchange. "I destroy the demon lord who ruled alone. I destroy the holy knight who served without question. I destroy the barriers between our worlds. I destroy the hatred that divides us." The silver-violet magic was growing, spreading from each clash of their weapons, seeping into the border itself. The shimmer between realms was changing, becoming less of a barrier and more of a bridge. Both armies watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened before their eyes. Finally, Azrael and Celeste stood facing each other, weapons raised for what would seem like a final strike. Instead, Azrael dropped his sword. Celeste did the same. The weapons fell to the ground on either side of the border, dark and light discarded. "I love you," Azrael said, not shouting but somehow his voice carried, "and that destroys everything I was supposed to be." "I love you," Celeste responded, "and that destroys everything the world expected of me." They came together at the border, and when they kissed, the silver-violet magic exploded outward in a wave of transformative power. It washed over both armies, over the border, over the watching realms, and where it touched, things changed. Demons felt warmth and connection they'd never experienced. Mortals felt the depth of magical potential they'd always feared. The border between realms didn't disappear, but it became permeable, crossable, a meeting place instead of a division. And the prophecy, carved in stone in 1,000 temples, began to glow. The words rearranged themselves, ancient magic rewriting what had always been written. The new prophecy was simpler, truer. "When love destroys hatred, the world will be remade." When Azrael and Celeste finally broke apart, breathing hard, they found themselves surrounded by silence. Both armies stared at them, at the changed border, at the prophecy made manifest in an entirely unexpected way. It was a young demon soldier who spoke first, his voice awed. "You did it. You fulfilled the prophecy." "Not the way we expected," one of the human knights added, sounding dazed, "but the world is certainly changing." Azrael looked at the border, at the silver-violet energy still pulsing there, at the way beings from both realms were tentatively stepping closer to it, curious instead of fearful. "We destroyed each other," he said wonderingly. "Everything we were supposed to be, all the roles we were forced into, we destroyed it all." "And remade ourselves," Celeste added. She was crying, but she was also laughing. "We remade everything." The demon nobles who'd called Azrael a traitor were silent now, watching the transformation rippling through their realm. The holy order that had imprisoned Celeste was seeing their rigid certainties dissolve. There would be resistance, Azrael knew. Change this fundamental wouldn't be easy or quick, but it had started, and it was real, and it was unstoppable. Mordeth approached the border cautiously, looking at the silver-violet energy with scholarly interest. "Well," he said eventually, "I suppose this is one way to fulfill an ancient prophecy, unconventional but effective." "We should probably address our people," Celeste said practically, though she didn't let go of Azrael's hand. "Explain what just happened." "Do we understand what just happened?" Azrael asked. "We loved each other despite every force in the universe telling us not to," Celeste said simply. "And that love was powerful enough to rewrite prophecy itself. I think that's all the explanation anyone needs." They stood together at the border, neither fully in one realm nor the other, existing in the space between. It seemed appropriate, Azrael thought. They'd never quite fit in their own worlds. Perhaps they were meant to build a new one, right here where reality touched reality. The armies dispersed slowly, confused and awed in equal measure. There would be councils to convene, explanations to make, new treaties to forge. The work of actually remaking the world would take time, effort and patience. But for now, in this moment, Azrael and Celeste had done the impossible. They'd taken a prophecy of destruction and turned it into one of creation. They'd loved each other when the universe demanded they fight, and in doing so, they'd proven that even destiny could be rewritten by those brave enough to choose differently. So, Celeste said, leaning against Azrael's shoulder as they watched the sunset paint both realms in shades of gold and purple, what do we do now? Azrael thought about his library, about her greenhouse, about all the plans they'd made in stolen moments. We live, he said. We build bridges between our worlds. We teach others that there's another way. We tend your gardens and research magic, and maybe, eventually, we stop being quite so legendary and just become us. I like the sound of that. Celeste tilted her face up to kiss him gently. Just us, the scholar and the healer who accidentally remade the world. Entirely by accident, Azrael agreed solemnly. We were really just trying to avoid a fight. They laughed together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had aligned months ago to bring them together. The prophecy was fulfilled, the world was changing, and two people who should have destroyed each other had instead discovered that love was its own kind of magic, powerful enough to transform not just themselves, but everything around them. In the demon realm, flowers began to grow in the volcanic soil for the first time in history, fed by silver-violet magic. In the mortal realm, scholars discovered they could work spells they'd never imagined possible. And at the border where two worlds met, a new place began to form, neither demon nor mortal, but something wonderfully, impossibly both. The prophecy had said they'd destroy each other. It was right. They destroyed the demon lord and the holy knight, the roles and expectations and destinies that had been written for them. And from that destruction, they'd created something the prophecy had never anticipated, a future of their own choosing, built on love instead of conflict, on hope instead of fear. It turned out that the best way to fulfill destiny was to completely rewrite it. And as Azrael held Celeste close, watching their combined magic reshape the world around them, he thought that perhaps this was what prophecies were really for, not to constrain the future, but to challenge it, to see if anyone was brave enough to prove that even fate could be changed. They did, and in the end, the story wasn't about a demon lord and a holy knight who destroyed each other. It was about two people who loved each other enough to destroy the very idea that they had to be enemies, and in doing so, gave both their worlds the chance to become something better. The prophecy was fulfilled, the world was remade, and somewhere in a quiet greenhouse attached to a grand library that now existed at the border between realms, a demon lord and a holy knight tended their gardens together and planned their impossibly hopeful future, one day at a time.